I have always been aware of how others perceive me, a formidable presence designed for the game, exuding strength and authority on the court. I am Pierre Morrow, the captain and leader, an unstoppable force standing over 2 meters tall, with broad shoulders and powerful arms capable of executing any dunk. My legs propel me through every sprint as if I were destined for this role. I relish the position of being at the pinnacle, the individual upon whom everyone relies when the stakes are high. The exhilaration of the crowd, the sound of sneakers on polished wood, and the critical moment just before the buzzer, when the outcome rests in my hands, invigorate me. However, there is a misconception that accompanies my stature. People assume that, given my prominence, I must revel in the attention I receive from women. Indeed, my direct messages are often filled with heart emojis, and I frequently receive lingering glances and flirtatious remarks that lead to real-life invitations. The situation intensifies after games, at social gatherings, and even in class, where admirers seem to orbit around me as if I were a coveted prize. Yet, I am not interested in playing that game, and they remain unaware of my disinterest. My teammates, my coach, and the fans who come to watch me play are all oblivious. This arrangement has been simpler, or at least it was, until we lost a player mid-season. Our coach acted swiftly to find a replacement, as we had a tournament approaching and could not afford to be short-handed. The newcomer was Miles Carter, a transfer student slightly shorter than I, with a lean build, quick hands, and keen eyes. He appeared to possess the potential of a good player, but once we took to the court, it became evident that he was extremely anxious. His passes were erratic, he hesitated on shots, and his defensive reads were poor. My frustration mounted with each missed opportunity. This was not merely a casual game, it was our season, and I refused to allow one player's lack of confidence to hinder our progress. As practice concluded and my teammates began to leave, I lingered behind, observing Miles as he sat dejectedly on the bench, his gaze fixed on the floor. I recognized that expression, defeat and doubt from someone who feels out of place. With a sigh, I ran my hand through my hair, reluctant to see him in such a state. I found myself in the position of the antagonist, yet I could not overlook the situation when the last member of the team vanished into the showers. I approached and took a seat on the bench opposite him. "Do you have a moment?" I inquired. He looked up, taken aback, but nodded in agreement. The locker room had fallen silent, with only the faint sound of running water breaking the stillness. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, and observed him intently. "I understand," I began, my tone steady yet assertive. "New team, new system, and a lot of scrutiny on you. However, you need to let that go. If you hesitate, you will falter. This game relies on instinct, not on second guessing." He nodded in acknowledgement, but I could see doubt etched on his face. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't want to mess up." I let out a scoff. "You already are." His head snapped up, eyes wide with surprise. I smirked, shaking my head. "Not because you lack skill, but because you are playing with fear. I have seen your capabilities, you can excel if you stop holding back." He swallowed hard, nodding slowly, yet his body language remained tense. I should have concluded the conversation there. I should have offered him a reassuring pat on the shoulder, suggested he take a shower, and departed. But I hesitated. In the midst of my encouragement, my gaze wandered. His shirt was already off, revealing damp skin glistening with sweat, his chest rising and falling rhythmically with each breath. Suddenly, the locker room felt constricted, and a wave of heat surged up my spine, accompanied by a sharp twist in my stomach, an undeniable sensation I could not dismiss. I clenched my jaw, striving to regain my focus, but the realization had struck. I had felt something inappropriate, and I was uncertain how much longer I could maintain the facade. The atmosphere in the locker room was thick, as if the heat from practice had not yet dissipated, and an invisible tension had settled between us, growing heavier with each passing moment of silence. The distant sound of the showers continued to echo, yet it did little to mask the rapid beating of my heart. Miles remained seated across from me, his hands loosely clasped between his knees, his head slightly bowed. He was clearly revisiting every error he had made during practice, the poor passes, the missed shots. I understood his feelings. I had been in his position before, experiencing the uncertainty of being the newcomer and questioning my place on the team. I should have concentrated on that perspective, on supporting him in his improvement, and ensuring our team remained resilient. However, my thoughts had drifted away from basketball. Somewhere between my speech and his silence, a change occurred. Perhaps it was the way he finally exhaled, his shoulders easing slightly as if he were releasing the burden he had imposed on himself. Maybe it was the sheen of sweat still glistening on his skin, a single droplet trailing down his chest and vanishing beneath the waistband of his shorts. The fact that we were alone in the room, with only the two of us present, heightened my awareness of our proximity. My heart raced, and intrusive thoughts surged into my mind, thoughts I had spent my life trying to suppress. I clenched my fists against my knees, attempting to redirect my focus elsewhere, but it was futile, my body had already betrayed me. A warmth coiled in my stomach, and an ache settled deep within my chest. Then Miles looked up, and I recognized it in his expression, the slight parting of his lips as if he wished to speak but struggled to find the words. I noticed the hitch in his breath and the flicker of something uncertain yet undeniably present. He felt it too. The realization struck me with such intensity that I acted without thinking or hesitating. I reached out, my fingers encircling his waist, gripping him before I could talk myself out of it. His skin was warm, and the muscles beneath my touch were firm. He gasped in surprise, tensing momentarily, yet he did not pull away. Instead, he leaned in, and that was all the encouragement I needed. I drew in closer, my lips meeting his in a collision of heat that surged through me. He was clearly revisiting every error he had made during practice, the poor passes, the missed shots. I understood his feelings. I had been in his position before, experiencing the uncertainty of being the newcomer and questioning my place on the team. I should have concentrated on that perspective, on supporting him in his improvement, and ensuring our team remained resilient. However, my thoughts had drifted away from basketball. Somewhere between my speech and his silence, a change occurred. Perhaps it was the way he finally exhaled, his shoulders easing slightly as if he were releasing the burden he had imposed on himself. Maybe it was the sheen of sweat still glistening on his skin, a single droplet trailing down his chest and vanishing beneath the waistband of his shorts. The fact that we were alone in the room, with only the two of us present, heightened my awareness of our proximity. My heart raced, and intrusive thoughts surged into my mind, thoughts I had spent my life trying to suppress. I clenched my fists against my knees, attempting to redirect my focus elsewhere, but it was futile, my body had already betrayed me. A warmth coiled in my stomach, and an ache settled deep within my chest. Then Miles looked up, and I recognized it in his expression, the slight parting of his lips as if he wished to speak but struggled to find the words. I noticed the hitch in his breath and the flicker of something uncertain yet undeniably present. He felt it too. The realization struck me with such intensity that I acted without thinking or hesitating. I reached out, my fingers encircling his waist, gripping him before I could talk myself out of it. His skin was warm, and the muscles beneath my touch were firm. He gasped in surprise, tensing momentarily, yet he did not pull away. Instead, he leaned in, and that was all the encouragement I needed. I drew in closer, my lips meeting his in a collision of heat that surged through me. He was clearly revisiting every error he had made during practice, the poor passes, the missed shots. I understood his feelings. I had been in his position before, experiencing the uncertainty of being the newcomer and questioning my place on the team. I should have concentrated on that perspective, on supporting him in his improvement, and ensuring our team remained resilient. However, my thoughts had drifted away from basketball. Somewhere between my speech and his silence, a change occurred. Perhaps it was the way he finally exhaled, his shoulders easing slightly as if he were releasing the burden he had imposed on himself. Maybe it was the sheen of sweat still glistening on his skin, a single droplet trailing down his chest and vanishing beneath the waistband of his shorts. The fact that we were alone in the room, with only the two of us present, heightened my awareness of our proximity. My heart raced, and intrusive thoughts surged into my mind, thoughts I had spent my life trying to suppress. I clenched my fists against my knees, attempting to redirect my focus elsewhere, but it was futile, my body had already betrayed me. A warmth coiled in my stomach, and an ache settled deep within my chest. Then Miles looked up, and I recognized it in his expression, the slight parting of his lips as if he wished to speak but struggled to find the words. I noticed the hitch in his breath and the flicker of something uncertain yet undeniably present. He felt it too. The realization struck me with such intensity that I acted without thinking or hesitating. I reached out, my fingers encircling his waist, gripping him before I could talk myself out of it. His skin was warm, and the muscles beneath my touch were firm. He gasped in surprise, tensing momentarily, yet he did not pull away. Instead, he leaned in, and that was all the encouragement I needed. I drew in closer, my lips meeting his in a collision of heat that surged through me. The fabric of my jersey tightened around me, but my thoughts were solely focused on him. I reached up, my knuckles grazing his jawline, tracing the defined contour of his cheekbone. I observed how his eyes deepened in color and how his lips parted slightly, as if he were anticipating my next action. I did not keep him waiting for long. I kissed him again, this time with a deliberate slowness and depth, unlike the previous urgency. My hands moved to his lower back, pressing him firmly against me. His body felt solid against mine, the lean muscle beneath his skin tensing as his fingers first gripped my shoulders and then glided down, his palms resting flat against my chest before descending lower. Every aspect of his touch was cautious yet willing, his initial hesitance giving way to a growing confidence, as if he were memorizing the sensation of my body beneath his hands and realizing how much he desired this connection as well. A sharp intake of breath and a soft sigh escaped him, our breaths intertwining as his fingers dug into my skin, pulling him even closer. My heart raced, heat pooling low in my stomach as I felt him respond to every caress, every subtle shift, every intentional movement. My hand traveled up his sides, feeling the rise and fall of his ribs beneath my palms, noting the slight shiver that coursed through him as my fingertips traced along his spine. Our bodies fit together seamlessly, as if this was a familiar dance, as if we had always been destined for this moment. His lips parted under mine, a soft, unsteady breath escaping as I deepened the kiss, my fingers pressing into the small of his back to keep him close, unwilling to let go. I was not ready to stop, I was not ready to pull away. When his hands found my face, his fingertips gliding along my jawline before tangling in my hair, gripping just enough to drive me wild, I realized he felt the same urgency. The distant sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, barely registering in my mind. The muted sounds of our teammates returning from the showers should have served as a warning, a reason to pause and reflect. However, my mind was no longer functioning, not with him still pressed against me, his fingers gliding over my skin as if he were insatiable. I pulled back just enough to meet his gaze, his eyes were heavy-lidded, his lips swollen, and his breathing matched my own in its irregularity. It was then that the reality of our situation struck me. We were in the locker room, and anyone could enter at any moment. Miles seemed to sense it simultaneously, his body freezing, hands lowering slightly, breath hitching as the voices outside grew louder. For a brief moment, we remained motionless, still enveloped in the aftermath of our loss of control, dazed by the intensity of what had just transpired. Then, as if emerging from a dream, he stepped back, his chest rising and falling, fingers flexing uncertainly as if unsure of their purpose. I exhaled slowly, running a hand over my face, my heart racing, skin still aflame from his touch. I yearned to reach for him again, to draw him back, but the voices outside intensified, footsteps approaching, and I realized we were out of time. I glanced at him, observing as he raked a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply before giving me a look that was part panic, part something else entirely, something that resembled a desire for more. Without uttering another word, he grabbed his bag, turned, and slipped out of the locker room before anyone could spot him. I remained there for a long moment, my body still thrumming with adrenaline, fingers twitching as they recalled the sensation of his skin beneath them. I understood that this was not the end. The locker room faded from my awareness, yet I could still feel the heat, the weight of his body against mine, the way his hands had roamed my skin as if uncovering something new, something forbidden, something he hadn't realized he wanted until it was right before him. My pulse continued to race, and my skin still tingled. He had touched me in a way that lingered, and despite taking numerous deep breaths, I could not dispel the memory of his gaze just before he departed. That look was neither one of regret nor fear, it was a look filled with desire for more, a sentiment I shared. The following day's practice was grueling, with the coach demanding we execute drills at maximum intensity, pushing our limits and testing our endurance, making us accountable for every mistake from the previous game. My muscles ached, and sweat drenched my jersey, yet I was oblivious to it all. Neither the fatigue nor the pain nor even the usual exhilaration from excelling on the court mattered, for he was present. Each time I caught a glimpse of him, each time I observed his lithe form moving through the gym, and each time I noticed his eyes darting toward me when he thought I was unaware, that same electric tension from the locker room surged back, intense and undeniable. He was playing with greater intensity today, pushing himself as if he had something to prove, moving with speed and precision, taking shots with newfound confidence. I could not ascertain whether this change stemmed from our encounter or if he was simply finding his rhythm within the team, but I was acutely aware of the shift, and I knew he sensed my gaze upon him. As practice concluded, the team dispersed, some players headed for the showers while others lingered on the sidelines to stretch and cool down. I grabbed a towel, wiped the sweat from my brow, and turned just in time to see him, Miles, retreat into the locker room alone. This was my opportunity, a moment to converse, to determine our next steps. I followed him in, my footsteps measured and deliberate, my heart racing. The room was hushed, save for the sound of running water and the soft rustle of fabric as he removed his jersey. I hesitated for a brief moment before stepping further inside. "Miles," I called softly. He halted, not turning around or uttering a word, simply standing there with his back to me, his shoulders rising and falling with uneven breaths. I moved closer, feeling the palpable tension between us, the kind that made my skin feel taut and my thoughts race. I spoke again, this time in a softer tone. At last, he turned to face me, and when our gazes locked, it became clear that we had both moved beyond the pretense. The distance that had separated us vanished in an instant. I acted without delay, my hands instinctively wrapping around his waist, drawing him closer. I noticed his breath catch, his fingers pausing momentarily before they grasped my arms, his touch tentative yet filled with desire. The moment elongated, transforming into something profound and undeniable. Then, he closed the gap between us. His initial touch was cautious, but when I did not withdraw and leaned in closer, his restraint crumbled. His hands traveled up my back, fingers pressing into my muscles, as if he feared the consequences of releasing his hold. My grip tightened in response, my body reacting instinctively, every nerve alive with the sensation of him against me. The sound of running water enveloped us, steam swirling around, rendering everything hazy and surreal, as if the world beyond this moment had ceased to exist. I could feel the warmth emanating from his skin, the rhythm of his chest rising and falling against mine, and the way his fingers traced tentative patterns along my spine until he finally surrendered completely, and I welcomed it. I cannot say how long we remained in that embrace. Time seemed to slow, stretching as if we had entered a moment neither of us wished to escape. However, reality eventually intruded, marked by the sounds of voices in the hallway and the distant echo of footsteps, a stark reminder that we were in a place where such intimacy was forbidden. He was the first to pull back, his breath still unsteady, his eyes dark with an emotion I could not quite identify. I let my hands fall, yet I did not step away, nor did he. For a brief moment, we stood there, the air between us still thick and charged. Finally, he broke the silence, asking, "What are we doing?" His voice was soft, yet it conveyed everything, the hesitation, the curiosity, the confusion, and beneath it all, a yearning for clarity. I swallowed hard, my own breath still uneven. The descent was rapid, and I found myself uncertain of its nature. I was unaware of the truth behind it, its significance, or its destination. However, one thing was clear, I had no desire to halt this momentum. The intensity of his gaze mirrored my own feelings, suggesting he shared my reluctance to stop. We adorned ourselves in silence, the atmosphere thick with unspoken words, the weight of recent events, and the unresolved tension that lingered between us. As we exited the locker room, re-entering a reality where we were merely teammates, I recognized that this was an issue I could no longer overlook, nor could he. The door closed behind us, isolating us from the outside world and leaving only the burden of our unvoiced thoughts. I felt an urgency that compelled me to act. I grasped his wrist, my fingers encircling the warm skin just above his pulse, sensing its rapid beat beneath my touch. He looked at me, surprised, his lips slightly parted, breath quickened from our hasty exit, as if we were concealing a secret that needed to remain hidden. Yet, I was unwilling to bury it or flee from it any longer. Before he could fully comprehend the situation, his back met the nearest wall, and my hands were already on him, pressing against his sides, feeling the warmth radiating from his body and the tautness of his muscles. He felt solid, undeniably real, and the rhythm of his breath against mine sent a jolt of electricity through me. His hands rose to grip my shoulders, fingers digging in as if seeking something to anchor himself, torn between the instinct to push me away or draw me nearer. He opted for the latter, and that was all the encouragement I needed. The kiss that followed was anything but cautious. It was a conflagration of desire and longing, a culmination of feelings that had been simmering for far too long, days of practices, stolen glances, and unacknowledged emotions. His lips met mine with an intensity that spoke volumes. The encounter was intense and filled with urgency as I approached him with equal fervor, pressing against him as if I could somehow bridge the distance between us. I yearned to etch this moment into my very being, to make it everlasting. His breath was warm and irregular, and each exhale against my lips sent shivers throughout my body. His hands roamed over my shoulders and down my arms, slipping beneath my jersey, tracing the contours of my stomach as if he sought to map every part of me. I let out a soft groan into his mouth, my grip tightening around his waist, my fingers digging into the curve of his hip as I pushed him further against the wall. The heat radiating between us was stifling, yet I had no desire to escape. I wanted to immerse myself in it completely. I could not recall when my shirt fell to the ground or when his hands began to glide across my back, his fingers igniting my skin with every touch, his nails grazing just enough to make my breath hitch. All I was aware of was the sensation of his body against mine, the pressure of his chest meeting my own, and the fervor with which his lips moved, hungry, demanding, taking everything I offered and asking for more. I surrendered to him without a second thought, without any sense of regret, for nothing had ever felt so right. His hands continued to explore, gliding over my ribs and up my back, fingertips brushing down my stomach as if he were committing every detail to memory. I mirrored his actions, tracing the line of his jaw and sliding down his throat, pressing gently against the rapid pulse beneath my fingers. He swallowed hard, his breathing uneven, his chest rising and falling too quickly, yet when I leaned in once more, he met me halfway. This was not a moment we could reverse or walk away from, it was tangible and real, and I was indifferent to everything else. Time seemed to dissolve, seconds elongating into an infinite stretch that felt too vast to confine to a single night. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and aflame, my hand still clutched his waist, unwilling to release him. In that moment, I understood I would never let him go.